So in today's lesson, we're going to discuss early childhood development, and I'm going to focus primarily on preschool age children, which is going to be between 4 and 5 years old. So preschool, we know, is something where students can begin to learn and interact with other students before they're entering a public school into a kindergarten program or classroom. So typically with development, we're going to discuss 3 different areas. So we're going to talk about physical development, we're going to talk about intellectual development, which you might sometimes, you might hear some people refer to it as cognitive development, but either way, they're about the same. And then the last one is social and emotional development. So a classroom that facilitates learning for a positive learning experience for children in this preschool age range is typically going to have a reading center. We might see something similar to a music center, so students can kind of be introduced to the rhythm and probably music in general. We might see blocks, we might see trucks, dolls, and kitchens are awesome because we see children kind of mimicking what they're seeing at home. So these social patterns that they're seeing their mom or dad in the kitchen, they might perform that in the classroom. So to start off, we're going to talk about physical development. So physical development is going to involve our fine and our gross motor skills. So the easiest way to remember the difference between those two is to remember that your fine motor skills are going to be more of your finer muscle movements. So if I kick a ball to you, that's gross motor because I'm involving my whole leg and even some of my stomach when I'm twisting to kick the ball. Whereas if I'm going to pick something up, and something small would be a good example, so let's say a bean, that's going to challenge more of my fine motor skills. So when we discuss physical development, some of the things that we might observe in these children would be if we're walking outside to have an outdoor playtime. So when children are walking down the steps to go outside, you might want to notice how they're walking. So in this age range, 4 or 5 years old, children should begin to be able to alternate steps, and sometimes that they're able to perform this without having to use the handrail, which is awesome. That's what we want to look for. Another thing that we can look for, which is again the fine motor, involves the fine motor skills, is going to be cutting with scissors. So some children are going to have trouble early on holding the scissors. You might see them kind of hold like this to the side, but we can facilitate that learning. It's all in the wrist movement, those fine motor skills. So when the child holds a paper, they need to be able to hold the scissors like this and cut like this. And as the child advances, they're going to be able to cut shapes and move the paper while still cutting with the scissors correctly, which is another really good thing to look for. And then another example would be putting puzzles together. So some of these examples that we're looking for, you might hear a psychologist call developmental milestones. And developmental milestones are how we keep track of child development. So when a particular child has mastered these behaviors, you might hear someone refer to it as achieving a developmental milestone, which is really good to hear. So the next one we're going to talk about is intellectual or cognitive development, and it involves those cognitive processes. So we've talked about in the past where cognition is going to be a lot of our general learning patterns. So this is going to be thinking, problem solving, and again, learning. So one way that we can look for this, when we do a story time, for example, that's a really great thing to have in a classroom because it kind of gets students thinking. So one good way to kind of measure for intellectual development would be you could show a book. So this one is called My Friend the Teacher. You could show a book to students and say, something along the lines of working with your partner, working with the person beside you, come up with what you think the story that we're reading is going to be about. So they're going to look mostly at the pictures. You might have to say the title a couple times for them to really remember it, and they can process a lot of information just based on the cover, and that's a really great thing for them to be doing. And then this one is called If You Give a Cat a Cupcake. So visuals are going to be really important for intellectual development. Before these students are really grasping the concept of titles, they can generally use the graphics to kind of correlate with the title. So then the last one that we're going to talk about is going to be social and emotional development. So this is going to involve a lot of interaction with others. So as I said before, the social interaction between a child and their parent. So in the kitchen is going to be a great example. You might hear a student say, oh, my dad was grilling hamburgers on the grill, this past weekend, and this is how he flipped the burgers, or this is what he put on my burger. And that student might show other students and get them involved, and then they're going to want to say, well, this is what my mom or dad does in the kitchen, or my grandma, grandfather, whoever might be their guardian. So that's a really great thing to look for. So then one of the things in this age range, 4 to 5 years old, that's really important for us to see is going to be empathy and independence. So independence is mostly going to be from the parent. Children are going to want to start to dress themselves, which gets very interesting because you'll see their personality really pull through with those outfit choices, which is awesome because that's really showing that they are learning this independent pattern. And then empathy, we can see in the classroom if a student falls, we want to see that other students are, going up to them saying, are you okay? Are you okay? Like trying to comfort them and what have you. So one thing that I might have seen in one of these classrooms is a student who shows independence by helping the teacher. And sometimes they might even take a task that you might not necessarily have asked them to help you, but they'll just take the task and do it themselves. So if I'm passing out, bells for a music activity, one student might volunteer to just pass out the bells themselves, which that is perfectly okay, and that's something that we do want to look for. So then I just have a couple other things that I wrote down. So as I had said before, we're going to look for those developmental milestones, and that's going to give us a guide as to where the student is. Now, obviously, if you look at a list of developmental milestones for these 3 categories, you might see different ones, and they're not all going to be in the same order, and they're not all going to have the same examples. But you'll see, so like for physical development, you'll see a lot of examples that are going to challenge more of the fine motor skills, but also some that include the gross motor skills. So that's one thing that we want to look for. But we have to remember that when we're looking at these, it's okay if the child isn't mastering these milestones in a particular order, because at one point or another, they are going to be able to complete those tasks, especially with the help of their teacher and their parents and anybody in their social interaction circle. And then another thing that I wrote down was that one way for us to learn about children is to engage in this free play. And as I had said before, you can learn a lot just by observing children. You can be, building blocks with them on the carpet, and they'll tell you anything that they're thinking about, which, again, as I've been talking about with psychology, they're comfortable when they're able to say these things. They feel comfortable enough to. And we're going to talk about naturalistic observation. So in the background right here, there's a black room, and it's a one-sided mirror or window reflection. So the children just think that it's, you know, a wall, basically. They can't see inside it. Well, inside, we might rotate students in and out so that they can see the whole classroom. So students will be in this observation room, and the students in the classroom can't see them. So we can see a lot, and we're going to be listening for certain things, and we're going to call this naturalistic observation, which in psychology, in a psychologist's definition, I suppose, would just be it's observing children in their natural habitat, so free play, and we're not engaging with the children. So we are kind of stepping aside, looking at the bigger picture as a whole. So we're not affecting how the students are kind of interacting with one another, excuse me. And so I think that one of the big takeaway messages is just that to remember that not all children are going to develop at the same time. Some might complete all these fine motor skill developmental milestones early on at age 4, and then some might not complete them until age 5 or possibly even later. And that's okay, but we just want to make sure that they are able to master some of them. And the examples that I gave are going to be really important for us to look out and make sure that the child is developing on time. So that's all I have.